Hello and welcome to Schools Not Out, your daily classroom for C-Sec and CAPE students. You can watch this lesson real time on Television Jamaica's YouTube channel or OneSpot Media. We also are live on Music 99. If you have questions on today's subject, you can send them into Television Jamaica's Facebook page or Instagram at television_Jamaica. Today's lesson is on Cape Caribbean Studies. I am Melissa Beckford-Simpson, your host for today. Today, we will be looking at a very sensitive topic, integration movement in the Caribbean for Caribbean studies. And the goal of our lesson is to explore the concept of regional integration and determine the extent to which Caribbean countries have been able to achieve this elusive phenomenon. Now, our objectives for today, we are going to trace the evolution of regional integration in the Caribbean. We're going to explain the importance of regional institutions that promote integration. We're going to discuss the achievements and challenges to regionalism and their impact on the development of Caribbean states in the context of globalization. And lastly, we are going to discuss strategies for answering multiple choice questions, mainly from Module 3. Okay, so let's begin the lesson. Now, just to recap, the Caribbean is made up of several different islands and mainland territories of varying sizes, as well as, all of what makes up the Caribbean. The history, for the most part, the territories share a common history of indigenous occupation, slavery, colonialism, indentureship, culture, climate, geography, all of that we face together. As small developing states, we have long recognized our similarities and therefore a need to collaborate for the good of everyone, hence regional integration. In the context of globalization, however, the attempts at regionalism have been severely hampered, and we will discuss this some more in detail. Let's look at the evolution of Caribbean regionalism. Attempts at integration in the region first began in the colonial era during the 1940s and 50s with early Caribbean leaders. The West Indies Federation lasted a total of 4 years. It started in 1958, was formed in 1958, and it ended in 1962. 10 Caribbean countries were involved in this union of self-government. Guyana, Bahamas and Belize were not a part of this union. However, from the very onset of the formation of the Federation, it was rife with challenges. Now, what were the reasons for the failure of Federation? Inadequate financing, insularity amongst Caribbean states, feelings of discontent. Jamaica and Trinidad, for example, we accounted for 70% of the funding, the population, and resources of the entire Federation. And therefore, we felt that we were the ones carrying the Federation. Jamaica then held a referendum, and the people of Jamaica voted to leave the Federation. Trinidad followed, and eventually the entire idea was abandoned. In fact, we remember Eric Williams' most famous saying, 1 from 10 equals 0. And so Trinidad followed Jamaica out of the Federation. So what have we been doing since then? Recognizing the need for some kind of integration because of our size, yet again, we still understood that we needed to integrate in some way or the other. And since Federation, we have tried a number of different things. Let's see if they worked. So we had first CARIFTA in 1968, which really means the Caribbean Free Trade Area. And this was formed at first between the countries that were independent by 1968, such as Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, and Guyana. The agreement was an acknowledgement that as small former colonies, we needed to achieve a mutually dependent understanding in terms of trade within the region. Now you would understand why this is important, because many Caribbean countries produce more or less the same things, such as sugar. After CARIFTA, or moving on from CARIFTA, we had the formation of CARICOM in 1973, and then the CSME in 1989. The Treaty of Chaguaramas gave rise to the Caribbean Community and Common Market, which is what CARICOM stands for. And then the Caribbean Single Market and Economy is the CSME. And it was established out of this need to ensure that the region benefits from better opportunities to sell our goods and services, creating one large market amongst its member states. These were the aims: a common market with internal free trade, meaning that goods and services could move freely within the region; a common external tariff; terms for the eventual free movement of capital, services, and labor within the region. Completely free movement. Okay, so the CARICOM flag is here. Then we have had some other kinds of regionalism. For example, the Association of Caribbean States, which is a grouping of 25 nations. Now, this is a little different from CARICOM, because these 25 nations include not just the English-speaking Caribbean, but French-speaking and Spanish-speaking Caribbean as well. And then we had the Free Trade Area of the Americas. And this was a proposal that was never signed, even though very much discussed, since Caribbean countries recognize the disadvantages this would have in terms of advancing globalization while undermining the economic, human, and sustainable development of individual states. So it didn't get off the ground, not in the way that we wanted it to. There are other groupings in the Caribbean: the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS. Now, this is an example of a successful subgrouping within the Caribbean region. They have had high levels of cooperation. Some of the members include Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, Montserrat, and so on. Now, what have they achieved? They have achieved a single currency. They have a central bank. They have a single judicial system, and they have joint civil aviation authority and other kinds of initiatives in education and health and so on. Now, this is a true example of a successful kind of integration taking place. Why do we need integration? Why is it so important that we integrate, that we come together as Caribbean people? Now, the global environment has not been kind to us Caribbean states because we are small, and therefore you would appreciate that what we can produce would be minute when compared to larger economies such as the United States and Canada and so on. What does all of this mean? Integration gives us an opportunity to speak as one voice. Now, of course, there are 2.5 million people in Jamaica. That's a very small number when compared to the entire Caribbean. So it would put us in a better stead in speaking up on issues that relate to us in the Caribbean if we were doing this together with one voice rather than individually. All right? So the need for this has been played out as time goes by, because Caribbean states recognize that it is very important for us to speak together as one voice. Now, one of the things that we have done is that we have had several agreements with the former metropole and other countries of the European Union. So the European Union as a whole, we have signed onto an agreement or a series of agreements. The first one signed in 1973 called the Loam Convention. Under the Loam Convention, Caribbean countries are able to receive preferential rates for the goods that we produce and sell in the European market. So we have an advantage. Why is this so important? Because how much we can produce is limited because of our land space and because of our resources in the Caribbean. So there was a definite need for us to have these kinds of preferential trade agreements going on. Now, of course, in the context of globalization and in other classes before, we have described what globalization is and in relation to development in the Caribbean. Globalization seeks to make the world one marketplace where everybody is free to trade in this one marketplace and nobody receives an unfair advantage over the other. It therefore means that in order to survive in this kind of environment, whatever goods or services you are selling or we are selling as Caribbean people must somehow meet a certain standard and meet a certain price. Because you would understand that larger economies are able to produce much more than we are able to produce. So we entered this series of agreements with the European Union to safeguard our produce from the Caribbean, particularly bananas and sugar and so on. Now, there was a kind of controversy that took place somewhere in the 1990s surrounding these preferential agreements that we had with the European Union. And a banana company, Chiquita Brands, argued and brought the EU to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which is the one that deals with matters of trade across the world. They brought us to the WTO and they argued that the European Union was giving us in the Caribbean an unfair advantage because of these preferential rates. And they also argued that it did not bide well for them, Chiquita Brands, and other brands who are selling on the open market. In other words, we were not adhering to the tenets of free trade through the Loam Convention. And so Chiquita Brands argued, and of course, they won because, in fact, the preferential agreements gave us an advantage as Caribbean states. Now, there's a point that we need to make here. Our attempts at regionalism or integration, coming together in the region, directly contradicts the ideals of globalization. Through regionalism, we are trying to achieve a togetherness in the Caribbean where we are able to safeguard ourselves. But globalization removes those safeguards and places us out in the open market to either sink or swim. So those are the reasons why we need integration, because as small states, we have to secure ourselves. Now, what are the challenges that we have had to regional integration? First, insularity amongst states, meaning that we are not together. We do not feel a sense of Caribbean-ness. Now, if you ask any Jamaican, the average Jamaican, do you feel Caribbean? Would you consider yourself Caribbean? Many Jamaicans would say, no, I don't consider myself Caribbean. I am a Jamaican. And perhaps if you check outside of the region, people do feel that if you're from the Caribbean, then you're automatically from Jamaica. And of course, as Jamaicans, we feel very good about this. But other Caribbean countries also feel a very close sense of affinity with their own country. And so instead of feeling Caribbean and behaving Caribbean, despite the fact that our passport now says that we are Caribbean nationals, we instead feel Jamaican and Trinidadian and Antiguan and so on. Another challenge, CARICOM and its ideals are not the reality for the average Caribbean national. So the average person going about their business and trying to make a living, as we would say it, eat a food, make a bread in Jamaica, does not concern themselves with anything to do with CARICOM. We know that we're Jamaican and that's it for us. Another factor, another challenge, inequality in the movement of goods and services across the region based on size and resources. So within the region, there are larger and smaller territories, and some receive an unfair advantage over others. Now, the problem that globalization poses for the region as a whole, because we are small in comparison to other states, that has been represented in the Caribbean as a microcosm of this globalization situation. So you have larger states, and not necessarily larger in size, but larger economies like Trinidad and Tobago, do not necessarily subscribe as much as smaller economies do to regionalism. And what we have had is that CARICOM has not demonstrated that it has much of a teeth, authority over issues in the Caribbean. One case in point would be Haiti's situation a while back when President Aristide was ousted, and then when he also came back and tried to stage a coup d'etat. Haiti is a member of CARICOM, and CARICOM did not do much to help to alleviate the political, economic, and social fallout from this particular situation. So those are some of the challenges that we face to regionalism, some of the reasons why we have not been able to come together in the way that we want to. Now let us look at this case in point, the Caribbean Court of Justice. Now the Caribbean Court of Justice was originally established to ensure that all Caribbean countries have, one, a court to deal with civil matters, meaning matters between states in the Caribbean, disputes between states, that is the original jurisdiction, and two, the appellate jurisdiction, which is appeals for criminal cases. Now, let us look at the original jurisdiction very briefly. We will recall the Shanique Mary case of 2011 between Barbados and Jamaica. Now, that situation was dealt with in the Caribbean Court of Justice, and the matter was settled there. So disputes within the region that relate to movement and restrictions and that go against the ideals of CARICOM, those are what are dealt with under the original jurisdiction. Now, all of the Caribbean countries who are part of CARICOM sign on to and can use this part of the Caribbean Court of Justice. However, not all of the Caribbean countries use the second part because, in fact, we still have the Privy Council in England as our final court of appeal. Now, in order to change the situation, it's going to take some political will on the part of countries like Jamaica. We will have to go through the processes to change the constitution. And this would mean not just legal changes, but also political changes to our current structure. So this is a case in point. So on the one hand, we have established the things that should cause us to come together as a region, such as in the case of the Caribbean Court of Justice. However, there are several barriers that have caused us not to be able to utilize all of the ideals that we have put forward under CARICOM. So then, what are some of the achievements? Are there any achievements at all that CARICOM has had over the years? Yes, there are some. Education. The University of the West Indies as a case in point, and the Caribbean Examinations Council as well. Most of the Caribbean countries, if not all, use the Caribbean Examinations Council's CSEC and CAPE levels of exams as final exams for our students. Disaster management. We have largely been able to come together because disasters and the potential for disasters are real for us in the Caribbean. We are directly in the path of incoming hurricanes, and fault lines are all around us and the movement of plates. And so we have been able to come together under SIDEMA, which manages these kinds of disasters that may occur in the region. Another thing that we have achieved, large movement of goods and services across the region through trade and trade agreements. Now, notice I said goods, particularly goods. We have had large movement of goods, and in some cases, the movement from some countries has been more than others, according to how they produce. We have also had some movement of labor through the CSME for certain categories of workers, such as barbers and hairdressers and university students and so on. Some movement we have achieved, not all. So currently, not all Caribbean nationals are able to just freely move from your country to another country to just establish a business or to go there to live. We do not have that situation, only for some categories of workers. And another achievement, the Carifta Games. The Carifta Games are something that we have been proud of since their establishment. So there are some gains, some achievements that we have had. Now, here are a list of some of the institutions that facilitate regional integration. We have mentioned already the University of the West Indies, the Caribbean Examinations Council, the Regional Security System, the West Indies Cricket Board, and some persons may argue in this current time as to the success or not of the West Indies Cricket Board. But the West Indies Cricket, we have had success in West Indies Cricket in the past, and we are waiting for those glory days to come back. Those cricket fans out there. The Carifta Games we just mentioned. The Caribbean Development Bank. Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, that's SIDEMA. Caribbean Council of Churches, and this is in a different area now. And the Caribbean Public Health Agency. Now, the Caribbean Public Health Agency is currently very much in use because it is this agency that is responsible for the testing of the COVID-19. So all of the testing kits and those even though there are areas in different Caribbean countries or labs in different Caribbean countries that can test for the COVID-19, all of them have to come under the regulations of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, or CARFA. Now, you name it and there's an institution for it. You name the area and there is an institution for it in the Caribbean, across the Caribbean as a whole. What have we been able to achieve? How can we look at the challenges that we have faced as against the achievements? Now, if we go back to those slides, you will notice that the challenges that we face outnumber the achievements that we have had in the Caribbean in terms of CARICOM. Now, we spoke earlier about the insularity and about not feeling that sense of Caribbean-ness. And it is true, the average Jamaican does not necessarily feel that way. And so we have not been able to have the kind of discussion that we want in terms of having true regional integration. Let's go back to the achievements. We could probably add some more things to this list. However, the list of achievements are minimal in comparison to the challenges. So a very popular question is that CARICOM, or very popular statement, is that CARICOM cannot in fact last more than, say, 5 years. Because we have been at it for some time and yet we have not been able to achieve what we want out of CARICOM. So that means we need to somehow go back to the drawing board. The political leaders need to have the political will, have the kinds of discussions that will move us forward. Because as we have seen, regionalism and integration is very important for us small states in the Caribbean to be able to compete with the rest of the world and to be able to achieve the level of economic development that we want. When we come back from the break, we are going to be going into something very interesting, the multiple choice questions. Yes, we're going to be looking at that. School's not out. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
weekly Schools Not Out tutorial sessions on Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Schools Not Out, live CSEC and CAPE lessons here on TVJ. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, along with TVJ, present Schools Not Out, CSEC and CAPE lessons live Mondays to Fridays from 9 a.m. to 12 noon, with weekly Schools Not Out tutorial sessions on Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Schools Not Out, live CSEC and CAPE lessons here on TVJ.
The Ministry of Water. Cover your nose and mouth when coughing with a tissue and dispose of it. Avoid close contact with anyone with a cold or flu-like symptoms. If you become ill, please visit your doctor or the nearest health center and share your travel history. The flu and coronavirus can kill. Let's protect each other. A message from the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Reduce your risk of virus.
Protect yourself and others from getting sick by washing your hands after coughing or sneezing, when caring for the sick, before, during, and after you prepare food, before eating, after toilet use, when hands are visibly dirty, and after handling animals or animal waste. COVID-19 tip: protect yourself and others from getting sick by washing.
Youth and Information, along with TVJ, present Schools Not Out, CSEC and CAPE lessons live Mondays to Fridays from 9 a.m. to 12 noon, with weekly Schools Not Out tutorial sessions on Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Schools Not Out, live CSEC and CAPE lessons here on TVJ. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, along with TVJ, present Schools Not Out, CSEC and CAPE lessons live Mondays to Fridays from 9 a.m. to 12 noon, with weekly Schools Not Out tutorial sessions on Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Schools Not Out, live CSEC and CAPE lessons here on TVJ. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, along with TVJ, present Schools Not Out.
Welcome back to Schools Not Out, where we are discussing Cape Caribbean studies. Now, before the break, we went through regional integration and we looked at the challenges to regional integration and development in the region. For this section, we are going to be looking at mastering the multiple choice. Now, this is the buzzword for all of you students out there, since we heard that the exams may just be multiple choice and your SBA. But I want to bring your attention back to the brain. Now, you may be tired of looking at this brain, but it's very important. Now, multiple choice is not a mindless activity, as some want to think. It actually requires the use of the brain, just like if you were writing the essay questions. So you need to begin to use your brain. All right. So how do we answer multiple choice questions? First, it is very important to be knowledgeable of the content. Brain again. If you do not know the content, then you are not able to answer multiple choice very well. Now, remember, you are not able to argue your way through. It's only one answer. And if you don't have that answer, then the answer is incorrect. Seek out key terms. Use the process of elimination. Pay attention to superlatives. Now we have created, do you remember PEEL? When we used PEEL for writing those essays? Now we have created another acronym for you, and this one is called READ. Yes, and let it not be lost on you. You need to read. You have to know the details of the content in order to answer multiple choice questions. So you need to read. But read is also a process. What does read mean? R means read the question at least twice before attempting to answer and interpret the question properly. In other words, you must understand clearly what the question is asking you before you attempt to answer it. Now, it is commonplace to swat multiple choice questions because sometimes they tend to be repeated. However, what happens is that sometimes the questions, the responses are changed. And you knew that the answer to the question when you saw it was C. But because the responses have been changed up, then the answer, the correct answer, would have been maybe B. And that you would get that question incorrect because you were attempting to swap the answer to the question rather than trying to understand the content in order to be able to read the question and interpret the question and then answer properly. E, what does E stand for? Examine all the responses. Read through all of the responses and eliminate the distractors. So you examine and you eliminate. Examine and eliminate the distractors. Now, there are always these distractors in the question. So there's one that is usually very far off. You know that cannot be the answer. But then sometimes there are two responses that could possibly be the answer. You attend, that is the A now, attend to key terms and superlatives that give clues for the answer, right? So what do I mean by that? The question itself sometimes give you some maybe dates, maybe terms, concepts that could allow you to arrive at the answer if you read the question clearly. So we are back at read. Superlatives like best, mainly, most likely, those are what you're looking for. And then D means to determine the best answer based on the responses given. Now this is very important and I want to emphasize on this. Determine the best answer from the responses given. Now you may be looking at the question and you may be thinking, but it could be this and it could be this. Look at the question again if you are at that kind of juncture. Look at the question again and determine what could be the best answer out of all the responses. That's what you're looking for. All right. So let's do an MCQ past paper challenge now. We're going to look at some of the questions. And these questions are coming mainly from the module 3 aspect, and I know some of you have challenges with the module 3, so we're focusing on the module 3 questions. And remember, module 3 looks at research. So this question says problem solving research is mainly referred to as research that is. Notice the superlative in this question. Remember, we mentioned that before as one of the strategies. Look at the superlative. So it says problem-solving research is mainly referred to as research that is. No, it does not mean that there aren't other responses that could possibly be the answer. It could possibly be referred to as something else. But what is it mainly referred to? That's what you're looking for. So the responses here are pure, A pure, B applied, C qualitative, and D systematic. What is your answer? I'm sure you have the answer there ready already. And the answer here is actually C, qualitative research. All right? And remember, qualitative research now looks at information and it could arrive at several different kinds of responses and solutions and so on. Another one. Okay, so the question asks, an example of a secondary source of information is information obtained from, the responses are A, a letter, B, a diary, C, a textbook, and D, an interview. Now, when we look at this question and putting in the strategies that were given before, what key term in this question would you use to answer the question? And my key term would be secondary source. Secondary source. Now you would need to know the difference between a secondary source and a primary source in order to answer this question. So the responses are a letter, a diary, a textbook, and interview. So the best possible answer there would be C, a textbook, because a textbook is information that is gathered from all kinds of sources. It is a secondary kind of information. Now, all of the others could possibly be a primary source. Once the source is written in or comes from the period or what you are looking at, then it is a primary source. Okay, then the next question now says, which of the following is not a scientific method of sampling? Now, there are two things we're looking for here in this question that could give you clues. Which of the following is not? And usually when the question asks about something that is not or something that is all, then these words are usually highlighted. So you are not supposed to miss these words. So pay attention. It says what is not a scientific method of sampling. And the responses are random, systematic, probability, and convenience. What would be the most likely answer here? You guessed it, D, convenience sampling. Because in convenience sampling, it is just done according to how the researcher feels. There's not necessarily any kind of rhyme or any kind of structure to this kind of sampling. All right, one more question. Systematic inquiry may be referred to as, and the responses are applied research, the scientific method, the generation of new knowledge, or D, an in-depth analysis of complex situations using words. What would be the answer here? The answer here is B, the scientific method. Another question. The most important function of the literature review in research is to, and we looked at the literature review in the last class when we were paying attention to the SBAs and how to write the literature review properly. Now, this question also has a superlative, the most important function. Now, for this question, there could be responses that are in fact functions of the literature review. In other words, you could be looking at several responses here that could be the answer. Let us look at, for example, link the research to important writers. And then let us look at establish the major concepts in the review, which is in fact the answer to the question. Look at A2, clarify the problem statement. Not necessarily, but you may want to consider that. Provide information for the introduction. Now that would be a distractor, and you would throw that one out from the very get-go. But you could possibly be looking at B and C as the correct answer there, because a function of literature reviews is also to link the research to other writers, other persons in the field who are experts in the field who have written about it, so that your research has some amount of credibility. But the answer, the most important function and the best possible answer is in fact C. All right, let us see if we can look at a few more. Hypothesis is best defined as A, statement of the variables that the study is expected to analyze. B, prediction of the relationships between variables. C, description of the nature of the problem that is being investigated. And D, question that identifies the problem and the methods of investigation. And the answer there is B. a prediction. It is in fact a prediction. So you are to put forward what you think the outcome may be. This may not be what the end result is, but it is in fact a prediction. Okay, next question. A valid source of secondary information for research in Caribbean studies would be A, textbooks, B, interviews, C, observations, and D, questionnaires. If you were following the question before, then it could give you some insight as to what this answer could be, because the first one was also asking you about secondary information, and the answer here is A. Now, students, I think that we would have provided you with some amount of understanding of how you are to go about dealing with multiple choice questions. That's all for today for Cape Caribbean Studies. I hope you grasped some of the points we discussed. You can catch a repeat of today's lesson on JNN today at 5 p.m. and in the Schools Not Out highlights on Saturday between 1 and 4 p.m. right here on TVJ. It also will be on video on demand on One Spot Media. Until next time, I am Melissa Beckford-Simpson. Pleasant viewing, stay safe, and remember to wash those hands.
Cape Lessons live Mondays to Fridays from 9 a.m. to 12 noon, with weekly Schools Not Out tutorial sessions on Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Schools Not Out, live CSEC and Cape Lessons here on TVJ. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, along with TVJ, present Schools Not Out.